Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the meeting of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force on Monday, the 22nd of January 2024. Please be aware the meeting is being recorded and live streamed, and the recording will be made available on the Council's website and YouTube channel. The purpose of this committee is to discuss and make recommendations in relation to the environmental, economic and social aspects of the proposed Lower Thames Crossing, known as the LTC. And today is going to be quite a bit of a roundup day on things that have happened through the DCO examination. But first we'll go to the agenda. Apologies for absence. Democratic Services, are there any apologies, please?
Yes, Chair, I have received 2 apologies, one for Councillor Muldowney and one for Co-op team member Laura Blake.
Thank you. Item 2, the minutes. I move that the minutes of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force meeting held on the 16th of October 2023 be approved as a correct record. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? I see no indication. Can we, as a committee, approve those minutes? A show of hands, please. Needs the contrary? No. Those minutes have been approved, thank you. I have not agreed to any items of urgent business this evening, which takes care of agenda point 3. Agenda item 4, declarations of interest. Does anyone wish to declare a declaration of interest? I see no indications. Thank you, members. And that moves us on to the substantive agenda item, item 5, which is the final update on the DCO examination. Can I ask Mark Bradbury and Chris Stratford to provide an update, please? And then members will have time for comments and questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll bring Chris in a second because Chris is the one who's done all the hard work, both in terms of the examination with the support of many other colleagues across the Council and our various consultants. Members of the committee will recall that the examination into the DCO or planning application in layman's terms for the Lower Thames Crossing ran from 20th of June through to the 20th of December. You'll recall we had a half-time report in October talking about the work that had been done to date and agreed that we'd come back once the examination finished and give you a report on the remainder of the process, how the Council responded and what we believe the major outstanding issues are. Chris's report produces chapter and verse on all of the stages to which we responded and provided links to all of our submissions and the relevant documents to go with that. I'm not proposing he takes you through all of that today. You've had that and you've had the opportunity to do it. But what I've suggested is he takes you through a recap of what the Lower Thames Crossing was designed to achieve and whether at the outcome of the examination our consultant team feels that they have met those objectives. If you've read the report, you'll know the answer, but I'm still going to ask Chris to take you through that, and then we can have a discussion about how we feel about that. Broadly, there's not much more we can do now in terms of the process, but if you decide that there are actions we still need to take, we can advise you on those. So I'm going to hand over to Chris, and Chris and I had a brief e-chat earlier today, and as I say, we've agreed that he's going to focus on the final infographic in your report, which sets out those key aims and whether we believe that the National Highways and their consultants persuaded us that they'd resolved them at the examination. Spoiler alert, the words fail across all of them suggest what the answer might be, but I'll let Chris go into a little bit more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I trust everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Very good.
Yeah.
Just by way of introduction, you may or may not have seen in the press in the last week or two an article in the Times and an article in the Daily Mail, and there was a chat on LinkedIn spearheaded by our own Henry Church of CBRE, but it was focusing on the sheer scale of the written submissions for the DCO. Now, whilst those articles got some of the numbers wrong, some of them were right. And it pointed out that there were 369,000 pages of evidence produced. Now, I'm not sure whether that was just National Highways or whether that was everybody. And as the examining authority have only got 3 months and they're halfway through that period now, it would mean that they would need to read 150 pages per hour in order for them to get through all of that submission material. Clearly impossible. But I mean, there were nearly 3,000 submissions made by various parties, of which 1,658 were from National Highways. The council itself made 31, and that includes the appendices that we submitted. So there was a vast quantity of material. There were only 16 hearings, which we attended, almost all of them, except some of the open floor hearings. And I say that by way of introduction, in that we have certainly put the council's case forward, and the reason why we put these infographics in was simply because there was such an enormous volume of material just from ourselves, let alone everybody else, and particularly National Highways, that we felt 3 summary slides, if you like, using this infographic were much more powerful because they were visually obvious. So just taking what Mark said, the Lower Thames Crossing objectives slide, which is, I forget which page it's on, well, it's on page 14 of your pack. 2 of the slides are in there. The objectives are the scheme objectives that DFT and Lower Thames Crossing themselves set, and they set them well over 5 years ago now, 7 scheme objectives. Now, in the council's view, after a lot of study, the first one, which is always used as the primary one, although there are no order of magnitude in any of them, they're all equal objectives, but nevertheless, relieve congestion on the Dartford crossing is the one that everyone uses. And our modelling team, and please don't ask me too many questions about this because I'm not a traffic modeller, they have calculated, and this was rebutted, of course, by National Highways, but once this opens, assuming it does, the traffic levels will be back to now within 5 years of opening. In other words, the 8 to 9, maybe 10 billion of cost will only relieve the Dartford crossing for something like 5 years. And it will create a lot of additional queuing and delays on the local road network prior to any local plan growth that might come forward. So that's the first one, and you've got to ask yourself whether in fact it's worth it. We calculated, well, National Highways calculated, that their benefit cost ratio, the BCR, is 1.22. In other words, they get £1.22 back for every pound spent. Now that was calculated some years ago, based on an August 2020 business plan. We anticipate that that will drop, particularly, well, if you count additional costs of plant and materials, the correct assumption on inflation, and if we actually take into account the supposed economic benefits, which we don't necessarily believe, that will drop well below 1. So whether or not the Treasury consider that important is a matter that will come forward in time. The second objective, improve road network resilience. There were some tests done of the Ossett Cock roundabout, and several other junctions. We never ever got to an agreed position on both a baseline and a forecast model for both, or for all of those junctions. They just would not produce it. Nevertheless, we demonstrated through a graphic, a moving graphic, the likely congestion that would occur soon after opening at the Orsett-Cock junction on most of the arms of the junction, irrespective of local plan growth. So we felt that local road network would be completely troubled by that. One of the objectives is to improve road safety, or safety generally. However, within their documentation, they predict on the new road 26 fatalities and 182 seriously injured per year. And it it occurred to our team that this is the only major highway to increase fatalities and injuries. And again, it was all rejected by National Highways, but without evidence. On the health and environmental, two particular items. There were an extra 6.6 million tonnes of CO2 created by the project, and the target of 10% biodiversity net gain will not be achieved. Now, that is a composite 10% based on three matters. It's to do with hedgerows, streams and rivers, and overall biodiversity. And on two of the three, they fail. Now, whilst the biodiversity net gain has now become a statutory requirement for normal planning applications, that is not yet the case for significant infrastructure projects. They don't come into force until November of 25. Nevertheless, it was a failure. In terms of supporting local and regional economic growth, we calculated that only 5% of the wider economic benefits come to Thurrock, which is a tiny fraction of Thurrock's economy. And given the level of cost of the scheme and the impacts, and the fact that it's likely to impede the delivery of the local plan, we felt this was a complete failure as well. Affordable to government and users, well, 8 to 9 million is the quoted figure by National Highways, and it was recently in the RIS3 document. Inflation will go up, but the cost per kilometre is a little more per kilometre than the cancelled section, the northern section of HS2. So one wonders why that was cancelled and this one's still going ahead. Value for money, I've mentioned those figures. Traffic benefits are less, well, about half. So in other words, you lose money, and all benefits only gets to 1.22, as I mentioned. Overall, those objectives, we don't believe any of them have been met. Now, we did do 3 infographics. The second one, which is also on page 14, set out what were originally 20 but became 19 of Thurrock's major concerns, and we've set those major concerns out in various submissions throughout the 6-month period. I won't necessarily go through them. It is pretty obvious that many of the items that I've just been mentioning are covered within this, and then it goes beyond that. And then the final infographic was effectively a summary, if you like, of why it doesn't necessarily work, by just gathering together all the items on one page. So I dare say there may be questions, but hopefully I have put web links in of all of the documents that are currently on the PINS website. So every single submission, everything we've ever submitted is there, and the whole library is there. I mean, there's nearly 3,000 documents. that library will stay probably until the end of this year, maybe longer, and then it'll disappear. We are not yet, we haven't gathered together all this information. We have asked PINS whether they will give it to us on a disk or a thumb drive, and we've asked National Highways, and National Highways has said no, and PINS have yet to respond. So, but the documents are all there electronically and can be easily downloaded. Whether you want to read them all is up to you. There are several thousand pages of council submissions alone. Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Chris and Mark. I've probably not got as many questions because I'm sort of singing to the converted here, but just a couple of observations. I too have seen some of the things bandied around by the press, and I think I saw one where if you printed all of the documents off on A4 paper, it would weigh about the same as a family car, and that one person is actually impossible in 365 days to actually read all of the documents. So, like you say, 155 per hour is you have to be going 24 hours a day. I think for the rate of return of 1.22, to lose so much greenbelt would be tragic for the greenbelt you'd lose for such a small rate of return. But yeah, I've got lots of comments and some questions, but I'll open up to members. Any member like to have a comment or question for Chris or Mark? Councillor Spate?
Yeah, my question, or my initial question, one of possibly many, is about something that's not included in the list there, and apologies if this has been discussed prior to me being on this committee, but I'm somewhat concerned about the 106, in that there appears to be no detail in here that it's been agreed and signed off. 106 matters relating to the crossing, and it was down as one of our original 20. There are now 19, and I'm intrigued to know, and as I say, apologies if it's already in the public domain, but what exactly has Thurrock Council signed up to in terms of the 106 relating to the Thames crossing?
Mark, do you want me to cover that?
Yeah, I'm happy for you to, and I'll step in if there's any additional I want to add. Thank you, Chris.
Well, the on page where are we? It's paragraph 1.28, page 12 of the report. The signed version is in the public domain, in both track changed and clean versions. Track changes being the ones that were agreed at the last few weeks. Now, I gave a report on what I recommended on the 106, and that was submitted to council officers, who then, I understand, discussed it with management, and it was decided that the document would be signed. Now, the details are there, but there aren't many. We have agreed, I think, four full-time officers for a period of probably 7.5 years, along with 2 other posts on a very temporary basis to do additional matters related to heritage and health impacts, and that gives the council a little over 2 million, I believe, over the period in total. There is a contribution of £100,000 towards a pedestrian crossing, and that's on Brennan Road at the, I think it's the eastern end. It would be for the council to install it if it felt it necessary, following a risk assessment and a road safety audit, and that would be in addition to the council's work on providing the pedestrian cycle routes along Brennan Road anyway. And there are some other minor matters covered in the 106, but that's all that was achieved. Does that help you?
Yeah, I have the document in front of me now, and apologies for not finding it sooner. It really concerns me. I think this was the big number on the top of it is the 20th of December. That's in whatever.
Yep.
I'm not sure how much debate and discussion has actually gone into this, and it absolutely concerns me that, yes, great, we're getting some officers for a number of years. Well, you know, we've got more than enough officers dealing with an awful lot of things. This is going to have a massive impact on the people, the residents of Thurrock. We're not, you know, and the whole thing. And to, you know, to find that we've got a pedestrian pathway that we've got to build and maybe get the money back for, I just think we've I'm hesitant to say sold our souls, but I'm somewhat shocked of the lack of detail and the lack of gain for the residents of Thurrock. And we've got a long history in this borough, and particularly the people in the towns and villages alongside this road. And by that I mean the areas like East Tilbury and Chadwell and whatever, of being hung, drawn and quartered over 106 agreements that are not followed through. There are issues in every ward about the lack of spending of 106 money and the lack of, or the poor management of 106 money. I'm just a little bit shocked that we've signed this off. I mean, hopefully it will be irrelevant because the thing will get chucked back, but the more we see and hear, the less likely that it's going to be. But I just think this is another poor piece of work on 106 for Thurrock. And that's, I don't know whether any other members have got any concerns on that, probably more informed than me. But, you know, a number of officers for a number of years to deal with what? What are they going to do? What's going to be achieved?
Can I, if I could just give you a little bit of history, Councillor Spade. Back at the beginning of 22, we put forward, I think it was about 33 recommendations initially of what we would like to see included. And we had only 6, I think it was 6 meetings with National Highways to discuss those. We produced very, very detailed spreadsheets about what likely cost it would be, what the justification was under the NPPF and the NPS rules. And gradually over the period, National Highways knocked each one of those back, and it's come down to the officer support and the pedestrian crossing. Now, if you look at the major concerns of the council in that infographic on page 14, we have mentioned unresolved wider network impacts. We were seeking significant improvements along a number of junctions, local road network junctions that National Highways refused to entertain at all. We made a number of suggestions within the Hatch report. If you cast your mind back several years to that, there were 58 recommendations for legacy improvements, mitigation and legacy, and council support. The council support issues have largely been dealt with. The mitigation has not really been dealt with, and the legacy hardly at all. And therefore, all of the issues that you're quite rightly pointing out were insufficiently covered, were the subject of submissions throughout the examination and well before it. However, the examining authority had no control over the 106. They only want to see the signed versions. A number of local authorities did not sign them. The only authorities to sign them was Thurrock and Havering, and possibly Essex, if I remember rightly. Kent didn't sign it, Gravesham didn't sign it, and I don't believe Medway did either. So that's the background to it. It wasn't for the want of trying. However, the decision about the signature on the 106 was not mine.
I think Mark's want to add something to that.
If I can, clearly there's a difference here between a planning application that the council decides and negotiates with the applicant as to what it wants into a Section 106 agreement. And if it feels that it's not getting enough, it doesn't make the decision. That the risk then is it may go to appeal, but it's our decision as to whether the planning consent is granted. In this case, we are not the decision maker. If we do not enter into a Section 106 agreement, it doesn't mean that the application will not be approved. It just means that we won't have signed the agreement. Now, as Chris has said, it is not for the want of trying that we've tried to get more into this agreement. But when it came down to it, literally at the last day or two, we were in a situation where either we sign this or we don't. Those parties that have chosen not to sign it will be subject to what's called a unilateral undertaking. So National Highways will offer something, but not necessarily the same as what they would do if it was a mutual agreement signed by both parties. In Thurrock's case, if we had not signed, the unilateral undertaking put forward by National Highways would have offered us less. So a decision was taken in consultation with the Chief Executive, the Leader of the Council and the portfolio holder, that we were better off signing something that gave us more than being forced to take something that was less. Us signing the Section 106 or not will not influence the final decision. It will just influence what we get out of this, over and above whatever conditions that the examiners seek to impose upon the applicant through planning conditions. So we took a strategic view that there was more money to be gained towards officer time, and the reason for that is simply that the decision will not be the end of the planning process. There will be a lot of conditions. There will be a requirement for council officers' time to go through those conditions and support the decision making on those. So I fully accept the councillor's point that more needed to be done through the whole planning process for local residents. We've put our case. It didn't come forward in the Section 106, and we had a simple choice of sign or not sign. And as I say, the unilateral would have given us less. And now we are reliant on the examiner to either throw it out or approve it with additional conditions. But it was a considered debate between a small group of people who had the authority to make that decision, and we took the view that we were better off getting, admittedly, a little bit more money. In the grand scheme of things, we're talking about tens of thousands towards the cost of the council having to deal with the application if it is approved.
Thank you for that, Mark and Chris. I mean, I think we need to put in perspective here exactly what we're getting. And I think if you were to go and stop 100 people from a selection of the wards across the borough and say, do they think that we've got a good deal? Given that we then tell them, which neither Chris nor yourself are actually going to be saying, I'm going to say what we've got. What we've got is a principal planning officer stroke project manager who's going to get paid just over 72,000 quid. We've got an environmental health officer who's going to get paid 55 grand. We've got a network management officer, whatever one of those is, who's going to get paid £64,713. And we've got a highways development manager who's going to get paid £65,147. Notwithstanding all the pension contributions, etc., etc., etc. We've got an economic development and skills officer who's got a figure down here of £347, so I don't quite know how that works, or indeed the landscape and ecology officer who's getting 8 grand. So that's what we've got by way of a settlement that has been agreed by, as you've just said, Dr. Smith, Councillor Jeffries, and I assume Councillor Maney as the portfolio holder. So thank you very much. I really don't think that those officers, when they are appointed, are going to make a scrap of difference to the detriment to the life of the people of this borough that this scheme, if it comes through, is going to make. And I fully accept there may be other things that to come along. But I find it interesting that only 2 of the parties agreed to sign up to this. You know, I think, I'll be quite frank with you, I'd have rather taken a punt and not signed up to it and made a point rather than just, you know, creating these jobs, because I really, you know, I'm looking at the job description and what they're going to do, you know, things like check that the local highway barriers are of the right size and whatever. Well, if they're not, you know, I mean, we shouldn't be offering, the government shouldn't be offering contracts to people to build these things if they're not going to work. And the government should also be monitoring and checking them, not necessarily Thurrock council officers, because this is a Highways England project. We do not have that, that legislation. We don't control parts of the A13, so we're not going to be controlling this one either. And I just find it really, really, really disappointing that a quorum of 3 or possibly 4 people have looked at this without reference to the chair of this committee, who could have been called in and asked an opinion, or members of this committee who could have been asked in and called an opinion, or members of the action group or whatever, to see if we feel, and I'll use those 2 magical words, best value. I really think we've sold our souls to sign a bit of paper, and I think this is a really, really, really poor decision. And I'll bet you bottom dollar, and it'll be long after I'm gone, but there'll be people sat in this chamber saying, what a dreadful decision that was, what a waste of time and effort. And I'm not being disparaging or disrespectful to yourself or to Chris or to those people there, but it just sums up the way that Thurrock does business. You know, we're getting a few more highly paid civil servants. What are the people of Thurrock getting? Not a lot, as far as I can see. That's all I've got to say. It's not a question, it's a statement.
Just a question from me, maybe you could combine it in your answer. I mean, Havering is probably the most comparable, even though we're going to be more physically detriment to the Lower Thames crossing. What was in Havering section 106 deal?
I honestly don't know. In the final closing moments, and they were right up against it like we were, I just didn't have time to look at other people's 106s, but they are available on the website. They will be part of the deadline 10 submissions from National Highways. If you go into the deadline 10 submissions, you will see them. I don't think they got an awful lot, to be honest. It would be similar to ours. Certainly they got some officer support. I'm not sure what else.
Thanks, Chris. Mark, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that whilst there are a list of officers in the Section 106 agreement, those were used to inform a sum of money. That sum of money can be spent however the council chooses. If this planning application is approved, there will be a cost to the council in dealing with all of those conditions. And if we hadn't reached an agreement or been provided with a unilateral Section 106 that provided sufficient money to do that, that would have to have been found from other sources. So, as I say, this is not an application where if it's approved, that's job done for the council. There will be a significant amount of work required to make sure that that application is delivered in accordance with the conditions. There will be an obligation on the council to do that. Our residents will expect us to do that. And if we hadn't negotiated a sum, then that would be coming from other funds. I 100% accept that we asked for a significant amount more, and it is hugely disappointing that that hasn't come forward through the Section 106. But as I say, a decision was taken in consultation to progress with it to achieve more than would have been otherwise the case. But clearly, your views will be fed back, and I will make the other decision makers aware of it.
Just to add, Mark, I've just looked up the Havering 106 off the website, and the only contributions they've got is a series of officer contributions, nothing else. They've got a flood and drainage engineer, 4,000, skills and economic development skills officer, 347. That's to attend meetings, by the way, Officer Councillor Spate. Landscape and ecology, 4,000. Archaeological advisor, a series of payments per annum. Network management officer, less than we're getting. Highways development manager, about the same as we're getting. Principal planning officer, similar amount. Environmental health, similar amount. So they've got, you could argue, a comparable, maybe slightly less sum of money than we got.
Well, I'm sorry. I mean, we've been banging on at this as a borough for God knows how many years now, and you know, as usual, the government and my criticism here is probably of the Highways Authority and the government more than although it does include the senior members of this council. You know, to be banged up at the 11th hour, well, you know, the last minute of the 11th hour, to sign in a decision away. You know, I'd love to know why the Kent authorities decided they weren't going to sign it. They generally end up coming out of things a bit better than we do. So there must have been a reason why they decided not to sign it. Time will tell on this, but all I know is that when we've got, and as I say, I'll be long gone, it may be my grandchildren are coughing up a bucket of exhaust fumes into a bucket. You know, all these officers with their fancy titles, not going to make a real lot of difference to those families, are they?
Any other comments, questions from members of the committee?
I just looked it up again. Sorry to interrupt, Councillor. Essex did sign, Kent did not. And there is a track changed unilateral from Kent, which doesn't really include anything. So it's a limited amount of material. So just to let you know. And Gravesham absolutely didn't sign.
Thanks, Chris. Did any of the, just going off Councillor Spate's comment there, did any of the councils give a reason publicly on the Kent side of the river why they didn't sign the section 106?
I don't honestly know. It would have been a political decision, most assuredly, in both Gravesham's case and Kent's case, but I honestly don't know.
Okay, thank you for that. I know you said earlier you're not a traffic modelling engineer.
No.
Just to go back to traffic modelling for a moment. I remember, and I can't remember which meeting it was, where PINs were pushing quite hard to say they wanted traffic data for Sitcock Junction, and to say that they, you know, that it really needed to be there to be scrutinised and gone through. And there was lots of National Highways people scurrying around in the back seats, trying to see what they could pull together. So how comes that's never actually got over the line during the process?
No, it did. They did produce, well, prior to the examination, they refused to publish or submit any material on local modelling. However, after one of the hearings, it was a requirement of the examining authority that they did so, and they did. And we got through several versions of it. I think there were 3 or 4 versions during the course of the examination. We criticised each one of them. They made some subtle but, in our view, incorrect changes to the model that made it look better. And we pinpointed what they were and explained those. And there was a joint position that we published at deadline 9A on the 15th of December between all the relevant parties, basically, which was DP World London Gateway, the Port of Tilbury, ourselves, and one other body, Essex County Council, which set out a joint position saying how the model was not acceptable for various reasons, and we set out our version collectively of what a planning condition or requirement ought to be. And ours was far more onerous on national highways than National Highways' own version. Now, it's up to the examining authority to make a recommendation to government as to which one, or even a hybrid of those, to accept. But we did go through a lot of modelling work in a very short space of time in the last month or so of the examination. So they did it, but they did it with their hands tied behind their back, and they tried to make themselves look better than, in fact, we believe the results show.
Thank you for that, Christian. And you mentioned there that the planning inspectorate might have to make a recommendation to government, whether it be your model, National Highways model, or a hybrid. So, given that's just one decision on one part of the project, and the project is so vast, there's going to be lots and lots of decisions, but I'm guessing that could be like that, where the planning inspectorate has to pick one model or the other, or one design or the other, or a hybrid.
Well,
have they got enough time to do that before March?
Well, that's the statutory time period, so they have to finish it by the 20th of March and make that confidential report to government. And generally speaking, past reports of similar sized projects have been of the order of 500 to 600 pages. So it'll be a substantial chunk of document. And within it, there will be many, many different recommendations and assessments made. It will have recommendations about additions or changes to the actual DCO order itself, which is what these requirements would be part of. And it will make recommendations, for instance, you mentioned Greenbelt, it'll make recommendations about that too. Since you mentioned Greenbelt, we believe that the Greenbelt assessment that they've done is almost non-existent. We went to town in various submissions and appendices setting out what we felt was wrong with their Greenbelt assessment. Gravesham and others thoroughly agreed with us, albeit in a shorter version. But their Greenbelt assessment didn't amount to very much at all. It wasn't, in our view, adequate or complying with the regulations under the NPPF/NPS. But that will all be part of the recommendations, because they have to prove exceptional circumstances within their report and within their Greenbelt assessment. We don't believe they have.
Thank you. Any other, Councillor Spate?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I've got to come back to this because I've just taken, having looked at the other part of this section, forget the officer side. Chris, what would be your best guess as to when the Lower Thames crossing, assuming it all goes ahead, what would be your best guess as a date? And you can go by year if you want, i.e. latter half or first half, that this and this is not a trick question, you know more about it than anybody else, so I'm just interested to know when you think it would be complete.
Right. Well, the decision is due by the 20th of June. Now, there have been a number of government decisions on DCOs that have been delayed. The A12 wasn't, and that was recently issued. Whether this will be or not, who knows? So assuming we get a decision from government on the 20th of June or soon after, there has been a government decision, if you remember, about a year back, to delay the start of construction of the Lower Thames crossing by 2 years, which means that the start of construction is nominally in 2026. Now, it is not clear what they can do prior to that. And we made a lot of points about what they consider to be enabling works or pre-construction works. And they believe that they can set up the compounds in advance of main construction works, which they'd have to do anyway, but they believe, I think, that they can do it between the grant later this year, possibly, and 2026 when major construction starts. So, and that would affect big areas of the borough, and it's not minor works. So if you assume that their construction period, which they've said countless times is likely to be 6 years, that takes you to 2032. That's notwithstanding any discussions there might be with Treasury as to whether this will be funded or not, because the only funding approved right now is to get through the DCO process. So 2032 is probably the earliest date by which something might be finished, on the assumption that a 6-year construction program could be achieved, and often they're not. So it could be slightly later. Does that help you?
That helps me enormously, and thank you for that. And I was just, I need to make a point, and I appreciate, I wasn't trying to get you into a convoluted detail, but just
No,
looking,
no, Phil.
but just looking at the other part of the 106 agreement, which is due to be completed no later than 6 months prior to the construction end date of this project. So we are probably talking about, let's be really kind and say the summer of 2032 is when this has to happen. Now,
Yep.
what we're actually getting for our £100,000 is a pedestrian crossing on Brennan Road in Tilbury, and Tilbury needs everything it can get, and I don't wish to, Tilbury deserves it. But this is a pedestrian crossing at some point between the junction with Fort Road and the junction with Southey Walk. So, you know, anybody who knows that area, it's a busy road, there's a lot of traffic, and it's whatever. And I'm sure there is an absolutely justifiable need for a pedestrian crossing, presumably for children and other people to get across that road. That road itself, Brennan Road, has got absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with the Lower Thames crossing. So it's clearly an identified road safety need to protect the people of this borough and the people of Tilbury. So I'm sure there's great merit in putting that pedestrian crossing there. It would possibly save a life at some point in time. But the people who signed this agreement have clearly recognised that there is a need for that pedestrian crossing. It's really important. But they've also signed on the dotted line and said, yeah, well, we'll wait till 2032 before you have to build it, because that's what it says. And, I don't think the government and highways are going to be rushing to chuck 10 grand at us to build that pedestrian crossing. And even if, so I just find it really slipshod that it doesn't say in here that crossing should be built within 6 months of the agreement actually being signed to get grant. So, again, we haven't built in, as far as I can read, looking at this, something that would make something beneficial to Thurrock. So, the one thing we might get that's beneficial physically to the people of Thurrock could happen any time between 2028 and 2032, subject to the whims of when they want to write a cheque and get it done. And it just sums up to me the slipshod approach of the senior management of this council in terms of dealing with getting, and I'm going back to the point I laboured earlier on, getting real benefits for the people. And I just hope to God, and I've already said this once this evening, but I just hope to God that no kid gets injured or hurt or even, God knows, killed on that bit of road where clearly there's a need for a pedestrian crossing any time before 2032, because we had the answer here to get that crossing put in place and we've not even bothered to force that one through. I just think it's so poor, and it is so unrepresentative of the needs of this borough. And I know we're dealing with an uncaring government that lacks humanity and all the rest of it. But this is just symptomatic of how Thurrock is getting dumped on and dumped on and dumped on. And it's about time we had the nuts to stand up and do what Kent said and said, look, okay, we'll take the worst possible thing you're going to offer because we're not going to give you the comfort of being able to sleep at night that we've signed this up.
You may.
With respect, that's not what the agreement says. The agreement says no later than. If the council chooses to do this in 2026 and submit the invoice to National Highways, they are bound to pay for it. So it doesn't say that we leave it till the end. It says no later than, and if we proceed with it, there is a payment schedule. So we will look at that.
I'll take your word for it. It doesn't say that on what I'm reading.
Schedule 2, severance contributions, no later than. So it doesn't say that's when you have to do it. It says if you don't do it by then, you don't get the money.
I consider myself reprimanded, then if that's not the right word, but whatever. I look forward then to Thurrock Council getting this pedestrian crossing built as soon as possible, and that it actually happens within 6 months of grant being given, rather than 6 months at the end of the construction. And in which case, I'll come and stand in this chamber and apologise.
Thank you.
Any other members of the committee comments or questions? I've got a question on the summary of Thurrock's Council's major concerns, the A to S. Inadequate legacy provision. Could you expand on that a bit, please?
Yeah, that refers to the 22, I think it was, recommendations in the 2019 Hatch report that the council published and sent to National Highways. And if you probably remember, there was a paper on this submitted to the committee. I'm just quickly trying to look it up. Hatch update. Yes, it was done in July of 21. So, well, 2.5 years ago, where we did an update of progress. I mean, I personally had about 40 meetings about these 58 items, and there were 22, I think, or 23 that were related to legacy. And if I remember correctly, 5 or 6 were agreed out of the 23. So it's a fairly poor, and that's largely because National Highways refused to do it. It wasn't a lack of effort on our part. Does that help you, Razor?
It does, thank you, Chris. I mean, statutory-wise, what do they have to agree to?
Nothing.
Nothing. I think that about sums up some of the points Councillor Spate was making earlier. And one on the same infographic, point S, inadequate provision and involvement of the emergency services. I know we've discussed that as a task force before. Was there any new information coming about during the DCO that we are going to actually make sure that when something does happen, and we know they've already predicted fatalities and major injuries, that the emergency services are going to be able to access A, the new road, and B, the residents that are already living in Thurrock on the existing networks?
Yeah, there were. There's a committee that Mark's predecessor, Anna Eastgate, and I helped set up with the emergency services and safety partners, and that includes all the local authorities and the blue lights. The emergency services and safety partners steering group, bit of a mouthful, that had many meetings. It had many submissions to the examining authority, and it had a final submission towards the end. I think it was 9 or 9A in December, setting out that it was completely unacceptable the way the rendezvous point was being organised in the DCO. The rendezvous point is an area for the emergency services. There was also 20 or 30 items in their own statement of common ground, of which probably at least half were not agreed, related to protest areas, related to, I think they agreed the fire provision within the tunnel, but the spacing of the cross passages between the two tunnels, I don't believe was finally agreed. And there were a number of other items. And I was involved in all of that throughout, along with several council officers at each meeting. So we made, through the Emergency Services Committee, a number of submissions to the examining authority. I echoed those within the council's submissions. So it was like a double whammy. And so all that material is before the examining authority, and we have to wait and see what their recommendation and hence the government's decision is on that, but it was certainly presented.
Yeah, thank you. It's good that we actually seem to have made some progress on it. So again, is that another like the decision earlier where it could be go with the National Highways way?
Yes, yes.
Yep, or hybrid.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I really worry there's not enough time to make some of these important decisions before 20th of March. But okay. Any other comments or questions from members of the committee before we wrap up?
Just bear in mind, though, Councillor, the 20th of March recommendation report does not get published. It is a confidential report to the Secretary of State, who then considers it over their 3-month period. So the public and the council and everybody won't hear anything until government makes its decision, either on or before the 20th of June or after that, at which point both reports will be published. The very large report from the examining authority would be published, as well as the government's own decision report, which is usually just 20 or 30 pages, but they're usually published together.
Councillor Spate?
Just a quick one. What would happen, just as for instance, were there to be a general election called mid 2000 and whatever year we're in, 24? Because you're talking about June. If you're talking about these 3 months, would it be likely that it would all get suspended again? Or I'm asking you to ask an unanswerable question. I know.
Well, who knows? He said that it will be in the second half of this year. I've read in the press that October, November might be the preferred time. Who knows? Whether or not they'll make the decision to spend anything up to 10 billion just prior to an election is your guess as good as mine. In any case, when the decision is made, it is more than likely that there will be a number of judicial review submissions made. It must be said that not one on any of the 120 DCOs that have been issued so far ever have survived a JR. However, if there is a High Court challenge, and bear in mind these legal matters are procedural, they're not content. So it's where there is a procedural problem, and they've all been turned back so far. The A303's High Court challenge effectively it only delayed the 303 decision for about 2 years. So into those time periods I gave you earlier, you've got to factor in the effect of a judicial review or a series of judicial reviews and any possible High Court challenge.
Being devil's advocate here, and I'll go to
Why not?
Mark's experience. He can probably, I'm sure he's thought ahead and he knows what the question is going to be. Could we bank our £250,000 and fund legal advice for a judicial review?
The short answer is almost certainly no, because that agreement is only triggered by the decision. To go back to your earlier question, clearly, if a general election is called before a decision is announced and we move into the pre-election period, then automatically it would be the new administration's decision. There is a lot of speculation that this decision may be left to a future government, but who knows? We're not going to get into that game here, but it'll be an interesting year.
Yeah.
Robert Quick, residence rep.
If I can work out how to turn the mic on, yeah. Just a general point I wanted to make. I've been a resident in Thurrock for 68 years now, and this is the first time I've ever been involved in any of the committees that have been brought together by Thurrock. I have to say that my time on this, I've been very impressed with Colin and Chris' participation in this and the help and information that they've given us all. Outside of that, my experience with Thurrock Council has been exactly the opposite. I had no confidence that any of the members of Thurrock Council would act as well on behalf of the residents as Chris and Colin have. So I just wanted to get that point across. Improved a little bit of my thoughts about the council, but still there's a lot of work to do for the council to become very positive for the residents.
I don't know if a lot of work to do is almost becoming the unofficial motto, but we've heard it quite often. But yes, I can definitely see some of the points you're making there, Mr. Quick. Anyone else, any comment or question? No, I mean, to sum up, I think the infographic's really good. I think it really works. I hope we're going to use it on our social media as per the unanimous motion to make more communication noise about Lower Thames Crossing so residents are more aware. We're going to have another Lower Thames Crossing Task Force meeting once the Planning Inspectorate have made their initial decision after that date. And just to, some of the things we've touched on as a task force over the past years and months, it's very expensive, it's very damaging to the greenbelt and to our lungs, and the actual benefit to cost ratio is so low, and to the local economic markets, it's not going to be much good. And like Councillor Spate said, there are going to be other things, we know that, but when we look at the Section 106 and its bare bones, we're looking at bus stops and some officer roles. So lots of things still to decide, and I hope the Planning Inspectorate make the right decision and take on board the views of this task force over the years, because I think we've made some really good points, and I'd like to put on record my thanks to Mark, Chris and the teams behind them, and the previous members as well that have contributed to the task force. And on that concludes the business of the meeting, and I now declare the meeting of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force closed at 19:03 p.m. Thank you.